The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everyone, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today we got a story from the U.S. Special Forces with some lessons learned and how we're passing this on to the next generation. For that, I've got a couple guests in the room. I'm joined by co-host John Simpson. And in case you don't know him, he is a veteran of the U.S. Army with over 40 years of sniper experience. He's an instructor with Snipercraft Incorporated and a research historian. John has also authored several books on the fundamentals and advanced tactics of marksmanship and sniper skills. Our guest is retired Lieutenant Colonel from the U.S. Army, Mark Grdovic. He's here to discuss a specific period of his service and his forthcoming book on the topic titled Those Who Face Death, The Untold Story of Special Forces and the Iraqi Kurdish Resistance. Mark served with the U.S. Army for over 23 years, including 19 years as a Special Forces officer. He served 2 tours in the 10th Special Forces Group. Mark's experiences include numerous deployments to Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and crisis response operations in both Europe and Africa. Since retirement in 2012, he's continued his work as a defense consultant and contractor supporting U.S. SOCOM in a variety of capacities. He holds a master's degree in National Defense Studies from King's College London and lives in Florida with his wife, Gretchen. So welcome to you guys.
No, thanks very much. Great to be here.
So we're going to get into your story and perspective of the different parts from these missions and stuff. But just kind of starting right off the top, what led you to write this book, and how'd you kind of cobble all this together? Because there's a whole lot in here that we're going to get into.
It's a great starting question. Obviously, it's funny because there's a couple things to it. One, in my time in Special Forces, I served as an instructor twice at the Special Forces course, and I would say I always have retained my instructor's mindset. So like I'm constantly, at least more so in my career, I actually still do this now. I'm constantly seeing things that stand out as an example or a teaching opportunity. So like when I was experiencing the story, it was always in the back of my mind of, hey, I want to make sure I capture this. I want to make sure we share, the lessons learned. The second part of it is, unlike other authors who, wow, that was a great story you wrote. This is more of a case where I was the observer to this story, and I knew when it was unfolding, this was not a routine event. This was not, just something normal. This was an extraordinary event that I was fortunate enough to be a participant in, but also I'm really unique that I'm one of the few people. I think I'm one of 2 people that know the whole story. So that also fueled the sense that I needed to capture this and make sure it was captured for one, it's a fantastic story, for those who love history, but also for the value of making sure we understand the lessons of it.
Okay.
And it took me 20 years to do that.
But actually putting it into a book format, what brought you to that? So what made you think, I got to put it in this format, but how did you start that process?
Yeah, first and foremost, I should also say too, it might sound dramatic to say, but I actually always felt like it was my final task or responsibility as the operations officer for the unit that did this, to tell the guy's story. And I'll say first and foremost, like, this is not one of those books where it's about me. It's not my story. I'm the teller of this story. So, I actually do feel like I had an obligation to make sure the regiment, the Special Forces Regiment, the Army, and anybody who's interested in history knows, this part of the story. And it is still largely, to my surprise, it's still largely unknown, at least in military circles. And I ended up doing a presentation at the Special Forces National Convention about 2.5 years ago. And I think that's what really pushed me to, get moving on the project that I had said I was going to do for years. And, for anybody who's out there listening and ever thinking about doing that, like, it literally starts with one day, open the laptop and just start writing.
Yeah.
Start writing that first page. And then it just sort of takes off from there. And it was literally 2.5 years ago I started writing.
Wow. So this has been in process for this long, and we were saying just off air before we started that you had an anticipated date of somewhere in March, but now that might be in April where this book might be coming out. That's kind of the goal.
Yes, and as soon as I learn that date, I will let you guys know.
Hey, well, I'll do everything I can to help get this story out and make sure people see all the links. So we'll connect with that. Yeah. So if you want to kind of start into the story, this takes place for the listeners, just so they're aware. It takes place 2003, 2002. You're preparing to go to Iraq. This is around the fall of Saddam. So the story kind of centers around this time frame. So I'll let you kind of get into it and start us where you think we should.
Sure. No, thanks. One thing that has dawned on me as I've told this story over the years, and now we're coming up on 22 years away from it, that the younger audiences, and by younger, I mean anybody who's probably 40 and younger, doesn't have some of the firsthand knowledge of some of the events like 9/11 that I used to be able to just assume the audience knew. So like when we talk about Saddam Hussein, like not as many people understand what was Saddam Hussein to the United States 25 years ago. So there's a little bit of a history, that starts from the Gulf War to 9/11, that he became a very, if anybody doesn't really know Saddam Hussein, I mean, he literally is like a James Bond movie villain that when you really know things about him historically, he is a larger than life dictator that is almost unrealistic sounding, like the way he actually controlled the country. We don't really see a lot of that today. We have lots of villains in the world, so to speak, but a strongman dictator like him is something we haven't really seen to the degree that he was. So after the Gulf War, the United States basically had a containment strategy of we're just going to keep Iraq contained. Everything changed on 9/11. And I'll say this always for the people, again, who are not older than 40 years old. At least in the military, I was a young major at that time, probably about 33 or 40, 34 years old. Everything translated to before 9/11 and after 9/11. Like the whole world changed. And literally, I would tell you the day before 9/11, there was a bunch of things we talked about in the military that seemed unrealistic. Like we might train for them, but we don't really think we'll ever do this. The day after 9/11, everything was on the table. Everything you've ever learned in the military, the most outlandish, high-risk thing, is now a possible consideration for execution. So that significantly changed the military's mindset overnight. And for the veterans who were in the military during 9/11, that's a whole weird generation of it. It was really challenging to go from, one day being a sort of risk-averse military to, okay, we actually have to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So most people know the story, how Afghanistan went. Special forces going in on horseback and all that sort of stuff. Fantastic stuff. About a year after that, we started talking about Iraq. And I think there's value in at least clarifying, because people tell the story now and it's, I didn't like this politician, I didn't like this administration, whatever. It was different at the time. First you got to appreciate, like, our mindset as a country was a little bit shook up. So if our decision-making or emotional state didn't seem completely rational in hindsight, historically looking at it, you got to appreciate at that time, we were a little bit frazzled, if you will. So now we suddenly looked at Iraq and realized, hey, I can't keep 25% of my military committed 24/7, 365 to contain the threat that is Iraq. That was acceptable before 9/11. After 9/11, I can't do that. So that was the mindset. So the theory of it was, we're going to remove him as a threat, and then we can focus on Afghanistan. We won't have to commit so much of our military to this. That was the theory of it. And you also got to appreciate, like, given our mindset, not to go down the road of the WMD discussion. Did he have them? Did he not have them? But the fear of the world is very unstable right now. We have to secure the world. That was kind of our mindset. So we started talking about potentially invading Iraq. And when I say we, I mean we, the U.S. military.
Mm-hmm.
And for folks that don't understand some of the logistics of this, so we had liberated Kuwait 10 years previous. When we liberated Kuwait, we did it with 25 divisions. Now we were talking about invading Iraq, which is 25 times larger than Kuwait, with 7 divisions. So there's some, math challenges there. And in the plan, though, what came out of the plan was, hey, we're gonna try to leverage some of the indigenous resistance elements, specifically the Kurdish factions in the north and the Shia factions in the south, to support the invasion effort. The 10th Special Forces Group was given the mission to enable the Kurdish resistance in the north and integrate it into the invasion plans.
On that, just so people have an idea too, like if they were looking at Google Maps, where the Kurdish is and where a lot of this story takes place is up in the northeast corner of Iraq.
Yeah, completely. And that's also worth pointing out. Like, to the normal American, who thinks about Iraq, they imagine flat deserts and, camels and palm trees. And that's not inaccurate for the western part of Iraq. The northern part of Iraq looks like the Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm talking about the part of Iraq that touches the Iranian border. The mountains are about 6,000 to 8,000 feet tall, extremely rugged, and that's where the the Iraqi Kurdish people live. So that was kind of the theory of it, and for what it's worth for the listeners too, in American Special Forces lingo, the term for that specific type of special operation, we call it unconventional warfare. Enabling a resistance element. So that was our mission. At the time, it's also probably worth pointing out that 10th Special Forces Group was focused on Europe. We were a European-oriented group. The reason we were getting asked to do this now is because other groups that normally would focus on Iraq were tied up in Afghanistan. So, I peripherally knew a little bit about Iraq. I sort of knew a little bit about the Kurds, but this wasn't my habitual area, or any of us. 10th Special Forces Group had been involved in the post-Gulf War years and something called Provide Comfort, where they actually did provide humanitarian assistance in the Kurdish sector. That came to an end in 1996. So there were still some guys in the group that had been to Iraqi Kurdistan. And that was really, really valuable and really, really important. So just also a quick word on, when we talk about, hey, we're going to work with the Kurds, what does that mean? Well, the Kurds have been, and I'll just say this the way a Kurd would say it. They've been betrayed by the U.S. government 3 times in their history. Once in 1972, once in 1991, and most recently in 1996. After the Gulf War, the Kurdish and Shia populations heard President Bush say, hey, you should take matters into your own hands. They interpreted that as if they were to rise up against Saddam, the U.S. would support them. That was a misunderstanding. Subsequently, they did rise up and they were crushed by Saddam significantly. Mm-hmm. And 5 years later, a similar event happened in the north with the Kurds, where it's a long, more detailed story, but there was an uprising. The Kurds will tell you that the United States insinuated that they should rise up. It went very, very badly, and thousands of Kurds were killed yet again. So this is the situation we're walking into of, hey, our potential partner is going to be pretty leery about working with us.
On that too, worth mentioning is like just where it's situated in the world, where they are in that specific region of Iraq. So they're sandwiched between, the rest of Iraq, which Saddam is controlling, and then they have Iran to the east over the mountains, and then Turkey is just kind of northwest of it, who are not necessarily their friends as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this region.
It's as complicated as possible. Yeah. It's really challenging. The Kurds have a phrase, they have no friends but the mountains. Mm-hmm. The Turks have been fighting a counterinsurgency against a different Kurdish faction for the last 10 years. So there's almost an ingrained hatred might sound strong, but it's probably pretty accurate. There's almost an ingrained hatred for the Kurds in Turkey because they've been fighting their own counterinsurgency for 10 years. So the Iraqi Kurds really do feel like they are sandwiched between no friendly territory. Mm-hmm. They're really an isolated pocket. There's 2 main Kurdish groups. One's called the KDP, the Kurdish Democratic Party, and the other one's called the PUK, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. These 2 groups have been internally fighting a civil war with each other since that event in 1996 where they felt like they were betrayed. Just to give you a sense, when I talked about Saddam was such a movie-like character strongman, he really understood how to terrorize and control a population. So given the events of 1996, he basically told the 2 Kurdish factions, I have room for 1 Kurdish faction. Discuss amongst yourselves. So the 2 Kurdish factions basically started fighting with each other. and it was a very brutal, bloody civil war for about 4 years, where they loosely came to sort of a ceasefire a little bit before 9/11. And now that 9/11 has occurred, they have realized there's an opportunity here because the U.S. is sort of changing its mindset. So this is where we find ourselves: is, hey, the potential partner we're talking about working with are those two groups, and you can, like I said, you can start to imagine all the challenging baggage that comes with that scenario.
Yeah.
This is also the place where, in 1988, Saddam used chemical weapons to put down the Kurdish resistance, and he actually used chemical weapons about 2 or 3 dozen times against the Kurdish population and the Shia population in the south. But the one in 1988 stands out as the biggest event because he killed 5,000 civilians in a place called Halabja, which is very, very close to the Iranian border. So there's always that too, is this threat of chemical weapons, which is not theory, it's history. He's used them many, many times on the population here. And that's also ingrained in everybody in the population's mindset because everyone knows someone who was killed by chemical weapons.
Yeah. And you do find them later on in the story in one of those bases that they have.
Yeah, we can talk about that because that's an interesting twist to the whole thing. But so that kind of gives you a sense of the population is literally terrified of Saddam's resilience to defy the U.S., defy the West, and survive coup attempts. He really is pretty amazing in that regard. So when you try to promote resistance amongst the population, I'm not going to say there's not a desire for it, but there's a realism of, hey, this is not going to work. We've tried this before. So there's a great skepticism, if you will. So, like I said, that's sort of the starting scenario where we find ourselves. From the U.S. Iraqi military point of view, the United States, for a variety of reasons, like I said, was getting very excited about, we're going to do this with 7 divisions, which I would say to most military professionals was weird, a little bit concerning, because we know things in the military. We know how many numbers of people it would take to do that task. This is grossly understating the numbers. So the potential for leveraging resistance pockets is really important.
So why did they choose to go with 7 though? Like, is it mainly because they're just saying we could do it with 7 if we get the indigenous population to, like, all of them on board and they'll handle it?
This is some great U.S. military history. So when the U.S. military first started talking about the idea of invading, at no surprise, the U.S. military has all these, I'm gonna call them binders with the war plans. So, John, you can appreciate this. Like, they broke out the old war plan, they blew the dust off of it, opened it up, and they started reading. And the problem is, when you started reading, it talks about the Army of 1992. Well, in 2002, that army doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. It's no longer here. So, like, the starting point for the invasion is activate 20 divisions. Well, the U.S. has shrunk its military significantly. We don't have 20 divisions to go to war with. Like, the entire U.S. military, all of it is 20 divisions in 2002. So I would tell you, the U.S. military literally spent probably 6 months spending time on this unrealistic plan. So then people who were in and around the Pentagon convinced Secretary Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense at the time, that technology has advanced so much in the last few years, we could do this with a handful of divisions. And they won favor with him, and they convinced him that that this could be done with a very, very small force. The final solution was a hybrid solution where, I'll say, some of the traditionalists were able to talk them off that position, and they met in the middle with, let's do this with 7 divisions, which was still a pretty light number, but I will tell you that's heavier than they originally intended. So that being said, one of the plans was 1 division will attack from the north from Turkey, 6 divisions will attack from the south from Kuwait, and then we will try to leverage the Shia and Kurdish resistance elements. The Shia in the south did not materialize, and that's a different conversation perhaps. But the potential for resistance had been broken and crushed so badly over the last years, it wasn't feasible. The 5th group kind of found themselves in a really weird, 5th Special Forces group found themselves in a weird position where they couldn't really materialize a resistance partner. The North was different. The terrain in the North is really good. The Kurdish mindset was still very much about resisting if we could just get them to not fight each other. And also, I would say, the Kurds, the term for the Kurdish guerrilla is Peshmerga. That's what they call their Kurdish guerrillas, and that's where the title of the book comes from, because the translation of the term Peshmerga is those who face death. Between the two factions, the KDP and the PUK, they have about 50,000 Kurdish Peshmerga. So there's a potential 50,000 person force that can be leveraged against Saddam. So that's obviously a very big deal, and that's very appealing to the U.S. military. So again, like that's kind of the starting position of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to work with.
Is when that happens, are they looking at that population and just saying like, I guess they're not. Well, maybe it's ideologically aligned because it's not religiously aligned. Like, what's the line that they're going on and saying like, okay, is this
That's a great question.
the lesser of two evils, or are they actually good in the sense of good? Like, I just wonder what makes them choose to align with somebody like that.
That's a really great and really important question. I would tell you the conventional U.S. military almost put this off to the side as don't care, because there was still this, we can handle this with technology. We have air power. We have, ground units. Go do your special forces thing, but, just sort of stay out of our way. We don't need to hear about it. Within special forces, though, and the CIA was a partner in this too. They understand the same thing. They understand this the same way we do. You want to be very selective about enabling a resistance. You can't just look at the short-term gains and say, hey, let's throw, 10,000 rifles at this group of guys, and then we'll sort it out later. I mean, I say that because there's been plenty of mistakes in history where that sort of attitude was taken.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a criteria that we refer to as a feasibility assessment, where you want to look at them and say, do they physically have the ability to make to be value added in a resistance? Like, do they have good terrain? Do they have indigenous leadership? Do they have a mindset that is willing to resist, or is the population broken? Is the population willing to assume risk? Because, not to go too far down this road, but a population will know what's going on.
Yeah.
So like if you have guerrillas fighting, if the population is not willing to resist essentially and assume some degree of risk, the guerrillas will not survive. And then you also then have to look at a second factor. What you just talked about is, are we ideologically aligned, and do we have compatible objectives? That's super important. And in this case, I would say we did. It's actually a pretty rare case where all the factors lined up, where the physical criteria are all present and the ideological or objective criteria are also present. We want the same thing.
Okay.
We want the removal of Saddam Hussein. These guys, the Kurdish people, for the most part, don't have some odd, completely different ideological opinions than us. Now, one thing that was out there, though, was the question of, hey, when this is all over, are we talking about a Kurdish state? And that's where I said, like, the U.S. government wasn't interested in having that conversation, but our partners like Turkey are very concerned that we're not paying attention to this.
Yeah.
And that, like, if you remove Saddam, is this pocket of Kurdish resistance going to stand up and say we're now a free state of Kurdistan? And there's pros and cons to that happening, but that's part of the conversation you would want to have. The U.S. government didn't really have that conversation.
Okay.
Which in hindsight was not that bad of a thing, because people on the ground like myself or the CIA were at least having part of that conversation with the leadership, so that there were no misinterpretations or false promises.
Okay. So your story kind of gets from here into some of the preparation and the training before you actually do deploy. You want to start there?
Yeah, sure. So for anybody, any listeners or military personnel, I would tell you, when you get the message one day that, hey, come on into the room, we got something secret to tell you. We're thinking about conducting an invasion. That's a significant emotional event. And I say that because, like, today in the military, the U.S. military, there's no shortage of combat veterans, and that's great. But their combat experience is on rotations, deployment rotations. Going on an invasion is a very different experience. So we started, like I said, planning the invasion. But the problem was a couple of things. We didn't know when it would be. Like, it was all rumor. It was constant rumors of, hey, it's probably going to be by September. It's probably going to be October. That went on for like 6 months. Incredibly emotionally draining to constantly be told, hey, I can't tell you officially when the invasion is, but between me and you, stay by your phone this weekend. Like, that kind of thing. Really, really difficult. It wore everybody out. It also begs the question, like, if you don't know how much time you have, what do you do with that time? And I will tell you, this is one of the things I'm probably most proud of, honestly. The way we approached it was, we don't know how much time we have, but let's make the best use of every day. So, well, what I mean by that is, CENTCOM, CENTCOM is the Central Command of the United States that has the responsibility for this part of the world, the Middle East. They never really produced, at least that I saw, they never really produced a written plan. The Special Operations Command underneath them, the two-star command called SOCCENT, which I was a part of for years, they also didn't publish a plan. So then it got to 10 Special Forces Group. Well, they didn't publish a plan either because they were waiting for their hire to give them a plan. So you can see that has like a trickle-down effect.
Yeah.
In 3rd Battalion, the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ken Tovo, at the time, and I was his operations officer, we made a very conscious decision of, we can't wait. We can't keep waiting for this perfect time where we're going to get a plan from higher, because we're being told we could go in a month. So we wrote a plan and issued it to our subordinates. And that might not sound like that big of a deal, but from a military perspective, like, we felt a real responsibility to do the things we've been taught in training and education our whole life, and don't just say, hey, this is real, so none of the rules apply. Like, I have to give time to my subordinates to prepare, regardless if I didn't get it from my hire. So we did that. So we wrote a plan. We put our we were 3rd Battalion. 3rd Battalion has 15 Special Forces teams spread out in 3 companies. We put all of those guys into isolation for a week of planning. We then put them through what we call pre-mission training. And there's a couple of parts of this that are really interesting, because we started to ask ourselves, what are the weird things that we're not as well trained on? Like, we're not going to do the regular stuff. We're not going to shoot, like, you're supposed to be trained.
Yeah.
But we started thinking, like, hey, what are we not as prepared for? So, like, we did a lot of close air support. We trained with foreign weapons. We did what's called goat training, which is where, under the care of a veterinarian, we bring in goats, we create injuries on them. And, it is pretty brutal, but the guys get a chance, under the supervision of a medic, a surgeon, and a veterinarian, to actually clamp a bleeding intestine. Go in and find the wound and stuff it with gauze, and you're getting blood all over your hands. And it's a great way to actually train in a most realistic setting. Mm-hmm. We took guys to Fort Leonard Wood to put them into a live chemical agent chamber under chemical gear. Not the most exciting of training, but it was pretty useful in hindsight. We trained guys in what we called media ambush, which at the time was more of a newer phenomenon on the battlefield. We had fake media teams in the training areas, like, just drive up to them during training and say, hey, who are you guys? What are you doing? And we gave guys the experience of, yeah, that's a journalist media crew. What are you going to do when you see them?
Oh, wow.
It was like I said, we spent a lot of time doing just sort of off the normal beaten path training to just make good use of our time. We put guys through a 3-day, what I'm going to call 3-day seminar with college professors from prominent universities to understand Kurdish and Middle Eastern history. We put guys through 2 weeks. Every leader went through 2 weeks of language training. You either went to Arabic, Turkish, or Kurdish. And I will just tell you, like, somebody might say, well, 2 weeks of language training, what does that do you? Not a lot. Mm-hmm. But the difference between having 0 and 2 weeks is significant. And like, with 2 weeks of training, I can actually, and I really did this, I made a card. You could sit down now and say, if I only had 50 words, what are the words I need to know? Yeah. So, like, you think about it, like, I wrote my 50 words, and now, given my ridiculously rudimentary language knowledge, I can at least point to these words and say them one at a time and communicate what I'm looking for. I need a truck. I need a doctor. Where is the leader? Things like that.
Bring me to your leader.
Yeah, pretty much. So it really did make a big difference. And then we also sent a lot of our NCOs to what's called the JRTC and the NTC. Those are 2 major training centers in the United States, to go observe conventional units fighting a giant tank battle in the NTC or a giant dismounted infantry battle at the JRTC. So that's just that's some of the things that we did to give guys, to really make use of our time. And we kept lining these events up one after the other, so that when the rumors proved false and we didn't deploy this weekend, we had something ready for next week that was valuable.
Yeah.
And we literally did that. We did that for darn close to probably 4 or 5 months. It was really impressive that we had no wasted time, and we weren't putting it on the teams. We weren't expecting the teams to figure this out. I had a team of guys that was laying on, what are we going to do if we're still here in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks? And that was really, really useful.
One of the interesting aspects of the book was you also bring in the family piece to it, and how you say you kind of always have one foot out the door, one foot is at home, and what that's like. And I guess for listeners too, I want them to understand, like, this is not just, and like you were saying to me, it's not just a story for the sake of telling a story, but there's a massive leadership aspect to this. There's so much, as I was reading through the book, I was actually writing down stuff for some job related thing here. Like, I was taking so many different lessons out of it. So there's a whole aspect of leadership that you're speaking to. And like, at every step, you're thinking kind of up the chain of command, but also down the chain of command, because you're in the middle, right? So you got to take care of two different worlds. And I like the family aspect though, where you're saying like, we don't know when we might be deploying. So, it's difficult. Like, we could go any second. I guess one of the things too on that is just, making use of the time. So it's like, if we deploy tomorrow, what do I wish I would have known yesterday? So treating every day like, okay, what's the one thing I really got to know before I'm leaving tomorrow? But to do that for like 4 or 5 months, like, holy shit, that is a long time.
It's so much worse than you think.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked this question, because you really made me realize like the weirdness of some of what I'm describing. Because I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it was a job and we were doing this. There's a couple aspects of this that are really important that I can probably left out. This being my second tour in 10th Special Forces Group, previously I had served in the 1st Battalion, which was forward stationed in Germany. I knew at least 1/3 of the guys. And Colonel Tovo was exactly the same. He probably knew more of the guys than I did. So it was really, and this is different from a regular military unit, like say the 82nd Airborne. We all know each other. I know their families. I know their wives. I know their kids. It's a much more personable feeling. So that's good, because it makes it just easier to function.
Yep.
The other thing is, I talked about, like, we did the planning. We are doing this pre-mission training. We are also getting crushed for requirements, from higher to participate in their planning. Colonel Tovo and myself are traveling constantly. And every time we travel, I tell my, deputy, my bags are in my office. If you guys get the word while we're gone, I had to go. He had to go to Turkey. I had to go to Qatar. I went to Tampa, Florida to go meet with CENTCOM. We both went to Italy. We went to Germany. Like, we were constantly, I had to go to England.
Wow.
We were constantly deploying and not knowing, am I not going to get to say goodbye to my family? Am I going to have to be pushed forward? That was really stressful. There was also, we joked about it quite a bit. It seemed like there was a bunch of things. We just joked. It was like, are people just messing with us? Because there were requirements like, everybody had to get a smallpox vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got the vaccination, then when you got it, which took a big chunk out of your arm, they're like, oh, and by the way, you're not allowed to have any close contact with any of your family members for 96 hours. And like, what's that? And I mean, I'm saying, like, you can't hug them, you can't kiss them. You're like, you just gave me a shot that I'm not allowed to touch my family for the next week, and you're telling me we might be going to war. There were tons of weird things like that just seemed really difficult. Like, one of the things, we kept packing our equipment, to load it onto planes. So we had just packed all of our rifles. And the group headquarters, I know they think they were doing us a favor, but they came down and they're like, hey, good news. We just got you guys all new rifles. And like, I didn't want a new rifle. I've got my rifle. It's got all my, scopes and accoutrements on it. It's zeroed and it's packed up. And you don't want a new rifle like out of the box. Like, you want it to have a break-in period.
Yeah.
So we had to unpack our rifles, rip all of the optics off it, put it on these new rifles, take them to the range and zero. That was not convenient. It's like, there was a lot of distractions like that.
Okay.
One other thing that's worth noting too, if someone gets told you're going to war, not like the way it is now in the U.S. military, like say with deployments, but like, we're going to war. All of a sudden, all the technology comes out of the woodwork, technology that we've been holding on to. And it is overwhelming. And I know everybody thinks they're helping us out, which is cool. And it really was. Some of it was good. Some of it was a disaster. Like, we're just getting boxes and boxes of things that we don't have room to even store or time to learn how to use. So that was also overwhelming. Like, for example, one day I'm in Colonel Tobo's office and we're talking about stuff, and I said, "Hey, we just got delivered 20 ATVs." And literally, as we're saying that, he looks out the window of his office, and the 10th Group compound in Fort Carson, Colorado, has a sort of has a running trail around it. As I'm telling him we just got 20 ATVs, he looks out the window and we see an ODA on probably 5 ATVs, and they are all tumbling now down the hill because ATVs are, ATVs are a little dangerous.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're doing. And like we both pause and look out the window and see an ODA on ATVs tumbling down the hill. And he goes, "Are those ours?" I said, "No, that's 2nd Battalion." And he goes, "Okay, keep ours in the motor pool until we're ready to deal with them." But like that's the kind of stuff you were dealing with on a daily basis that was just really hard. The typical guys on an ODA, they're not timid. They're smart dudes and they're great. So like we kept issuing these guys equipment, and like one of the things that was brand new was what was called Blue Force trackers. It was a new piece of technology that was brilliant, about the size of a paperback novel, and it emits a signal that lets command and control people see on a screen where you are. That was brand new technology at the time. It runs on a very odd shaped battery. The military has always had this affinity for like really unique shaped batteries that only fit one thing. Literally the day we issued this new technology to the guys, and I swing by the team room to see if did you guys pick up your Blue Force trackers? I literally see, our commo guys disassembling them and ripping the wires out. They went downtown and went to Radio Shack and picked up connector wires for a cigarette lighter in a car, and they changed the wiring and they're soldering it. And half my brain wants to be mad at these guys for disassembling new equipment and like not even asking if they could rip the wiring out. And the other half, I'm amazed at their ingenuity that they're doing stuff like that. And there's so many examples of things like that they were doing. They were building mast antennas out of PVC piping. They were ripping car batteries out of rental cars and putting in marine cell batteries to see if we could run multiple electrical devices off the car's battery without draining it. Like they were constantly testing ideas and not waiting.
Some of that's pretty brilliant, though. I mean, when you think of where you're going in the world, you're like, well, if I travel now for leisure, I got to bring one of those weird plugs with the 6 different prongs and all this stuff. And it's like, but a car, plug it in the cigarette lighter. Every vehicle on that side of the world is going to have that because most of the cars over there are going to be older. So, yeah, it's a good idea.
That's the kind of stuff, like I said, the guys were not waiting. They were figuring stuff out.
Yeah. So, Mark, one of the things that impressed me reading about the pre-mission preparation, and this also related back to my own experience, the insistence that guys are going, it was, hey, this is going to be the equipment load. This is what we're going to be putting on the vehicles, and you basically, if I remember correctly, you were basically insisting that, okay, if you're going to carry a bazillion rounds of small arms ammo, this is the cubage and this is how much it weighs. Go ahead and put it on the truck. And I just wish if you would expand on that.
Yeah. So, like I said, we put guys through isolation planning. And one of the portions of the plan was they talked about what they're going to take with them. And we also didn't know what vehicles we're going to have. So we expected we were going to have some variety of civilian pickup trucks because that's what they were doing in Afghanistan. So the guys all, just like you said, they came out and they said, well, we're going to bring a 50 caliber machine gun. We're going to bring 1,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammo. We're going to bring this, that, and the other thing. So my team of guys, the same guys that were setting up the training, for 2-3 weeks down the road, they went out and they filled ammo cans or boxes to simulate the weight and size of everything you said. So after you said you're going to take all that stuff, we took guys outside and we gave them pickup trucks and said, load it up. And what we found, and you call it a rehearsal, what we found was every single ODA to the man was either 500 to 1,500 pounds overweight of what they estimated. And that's important because that's the kind of weight that will break an axle in a truck. Mm-hmm. I mean, so like that was a case of we took rehearsal, we took the planning, took it into rehearsal, and we learned something that was wrong.
I think a really good thing to think on with this as well is there's a very big difference between, say, the people planning things from very far away and the ones doing the practical exercise or actually in the experience. Obviously, I see this more on the law enforcement side with my experience, but it's like, lots of people think they've got the the theoretical knowledge of how things should look or play out. But when you're actually in the middle of it, you're like, yeah, it doesn't work. So
Yeah.
it's good practice.
You mentioned before leadership, and I want to hit on this topic before I forget about it. So like I tell everybody, like, leadership was one of the things why we were successful. And I'm talking not just about Lieutenant Colonel Tovo, his leadership style, but the company commanders, the NCOs. Like, there was just a great style of leadership across the battalion and at the group for the most part. Colonel Cleveland was the group commander. I've known him for a real long time. Spectacular, commander. This is really, really important, because I would describe this as there's a band where you want this to work. If the leadership is off, they set a tone for the entire organization. And if they're too harsh, then the guys are like risk averse, and they become sort of timid. They're always waiting to be told. They're waiting for permission. And if the leadership is too weak, then the guys become reckless, and almost like cavalier and reckless. There's this band where you want them in that middle, where you want them to be bold, innovative, feel empowered. But it's tricky to get the unit. It's not something you can just put out in writing or order them to be that way. You have to create an environment. And if you're fortunate enough to pull this off, what happens is you create this environment where it's almost like what we're striving for with artificial intelligence these days and everything. They're self-functioning. You don't have to be on them at every minute, and it empowers them to be. It's exponential. Like, you now have 15 elements that are doing great work, which is so much more than you supervising all of them. And that's what we refer to as decentralized command and control. It's really hard to create, and it's also very rare, because you can't just say it but not let guys live that way in what we call garrison. And then hopefully when we go to war, we'll change. You have to promote that day to day, in garrison, as we call it, so that you can do it when you need to in wartime.
Yeah.
And Colonel Tovo created that kind of atmosphere that, it's worth giving credit to that, because that probably is the biggest thing that empowered us to make our teams functional.
Okay.
So basically, he created an environment where the commo guys felt comfortable tearing open brand new equipment to, modify the power, the power input.
Yeah, and that's just a simple example, but it permeates everything. And like, we also are communicating enough, like they don't feel like if they make a mistake, they know that I'll tell them, hey, that was a mistake. I wish you hadn't done that. No one's going to like lose their temper or be stupid about it. Like, we're all a team, and we're all communicating.
So from here, you were doing all the planning, and I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead, but this is where you guys were planning on possibly launching out of Turkey, but then even that changed, and then switched to Romania. So you want to get into that part of it?
Yeah. So we'll start transition to like, okay, so how does this play out? And this is where I think the story probably gets more interesting. You expect problems, but I would tell you in this story, the problems we faced were not anything I'd ever mentally prepared myself for. I'm prepared for somebody to tell me they lost a weapon, or, they lost, that's what I'm expecting. You don't expect somebody to come and go, hey, just quick update. The launch forward staging base we anticipated, where we've been shuttling all of our equipment for the last 6 months, and the European command has been purchasing Land Rover vehicles and shuttling them to Turkey at a base near the southern border of Turkey. Turkey's decided to now change their position, and they're not going to let us use that location, and they're not going to give us our equipment back. That's a pretty big change to the plan. That's a tough one to adapt to. So what are you going to do now? Because our plan was we were going to airland. Saddam Hussein had built 2 airfields in northern Iraq that he never used. He built them during the Iran-Iraq war. So there were 2 legitimate airfields, coincidentally, one in the KDP sector, one in the PUK sector, that we planned to use. So the plan was we're going to airland MC-130 aircraft, military aircraft, that's going to infiltrate half the teams, and the other half of the teams are going to drive across the Turkish border and then make the 6 to 8 hour drive to the northern part of my sector. Now that Turkey is out, all of that just fell apart. So, we're kind of like, we have no place to launch from, and we have none of our equipment. All of our equipment has been pushed forward to a base called Diyarbakir in Turkey. So all we have are basically our rucksacks and our weapons. I should point out, so during that whole period of planning I was talking about, we created what we call a pilot team. That's sort of an unconventional warfare term where it's a team that we, to describe to say this is what we do. To my knowledge, we haven't done this. We've never done this in like our 60 years of existence, but it's something we've always trained for. We've always talked about. So we put together a pilot team of very, very experienced guys. We've linked them up with the CIA's guys, and they went on the ground to start coordinating things with our Kurdish counterparts 5 to 6 months before we arrived.
Mm-hmm.
So simply put, in October and November of 2002, these guys were on the ground with the CIA in northern Iraq. The CIA had been on the ground since probably July. And I said that the CIA went in, reestablished contact with Kurdish entities that we knew from years previous, and then they brought our team members in to be part of their team. This is also a critical aspect of why we were successful. The fact that we were able to put a team in, we put a 6-person team in from 3rd Battalion and a 6-person team in from 2nd Battalion. These guys were the ones that started brokering all the agreements, all the arrangements. What are we going to do? Do we agree that we're going to do this? The airfield I talked about, the Air Force, asked the question, hey, how thick is the asphalt on the airfield? So we had what we call the pilot team. We had them test it with what's called a penetrometer, and it wasn't thick enough for Air Force standards to land a plane. So the pilot team coordinated with the Kurds and said, who built this airfield? And this is very, you can imagine this in sort of the third world. Who built this airfield? And the guy you're talking to is like, oh, it's the guy in that house that's down the road from the airfield. So literally the question was, how much money would it take to put 2 more inches of asphalt on the airfield? And they're like, $50,000. Like, okay. So they provided that money and coordinated the work.
Yeah.
And it literally is a family. It's a guy, his kid, and his truck that are, putting this asphalt. So if anybody, who knows about that operation, thought that was really smart, the way you made it, you did it really low key where nobody would notice. That was not deliberate. That's the guy who built the airfield, 15 years ago. And now he's adding 2 more inches to it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of things that the pilot team coordinated. And they also prepared for what we'll call the staging and reception for the follow-on team. So when we were in planning, every one of my teams knew, like I'm going to use artificial numbers just for the simplicity of it. Say you're my 5th team. The 5th team knows they're going to link up with the 23rd Peshmerga battalion in this town. And here's a dossier on the Kurdish commander. Here's, the maps. And so that really facilitated our planning. So that was really, really important.
For this point too, is with these groups going in, I think these were the ones in the story it talks about having, you got the evasion maps and the blood chits.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit about that part?
Yeah, that was from my info.
Mm-hmm.
Let me save that because I'll talk about that in a second. So now jumping back to where you were, Turkey has just fallen out. So you could imagine the Kurdish factions are all throwing their hands up in the air and going, oh, here we go again. The U.S. has told us we should rise up. We've said we're going to rise up. Saddam has seen that we've said that. And now the U.S. is bailing out. That's the way it felt.
Mm-hmm.
The pilot team and the CIA were instrumental in keeping the Kurds calm that, no, we're still going to make this work. So a lot of work went into, okay, if we can't use Turkey, where can we go? And the decision was made to go to Romania. And I always jokingly say this to anybody, who's listening. If you're like, wow, I didn't know Romania bordered Iraq. It does not. It's a good 1,000 miles farther away. So a little bit late in the game, but we got word in February that Romania had been cleared for our new staging base. So we flew and landed to Romania. Most of our equipment was still in Turkey, like all the vehicles and things. So, and by the way, Romania, the airfields in Romania in February look like the Arctic. So we basically get off these planes. It's a completely snow-covered airfield with old Soviet-style buildings, and we have no equipment. But this is an example I'm talking about. We're not solving the problem, but we're solving it incrementally. This doesn't get us into Iraq, but it gets us closer.
Yeah.
So now the new problem is, okay, well, how do we get from Iraq from here? So we're in Romania, everybody's there, and the military is now starting to look at us like we're not going to get in the fight. They're focusing on the southern invasion, and we know that we need to do some things to restore the Kurdish confidence that we are not abandoning you yet again. So Colonel Cleveland gets this idea of, hey, let's go ahead and send in the 2 battalion commanders and the 2 operations officers. Which, I can tell you from an interesting experience too. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, we're thinking about infiltrating you in tonight into the Iraqi territory, it's a weird feeling to, like, in your mind be like, okay, act like that's totally normal. Like, don't act like you're freaked out. Like, yeah, tonight, after dinner or before dinner, like, like as if it makes a difference. Like, I have nothing to say here. Like, okay, so we get word we're gonna infiltrate the Turkey, and then we're gonna figure out how we get from Turkey to try to cross the border. So that's the plan. So with what you're talking about, as I'm doing the preparations to try to leave tonight, I went over to some guys I know in the headquarters, and I tried to pick up. There's a whole bunch of things we're trying to get. We're trying to get radios. I'm trying to get gold coins. I'm trying to get cash. I'm trying to get what are called blood chits. Blood chits. It's normally just like a single page silk, or in this case, they were actually that waterproof paper document with a U.S. flag written in multiple languages that says, if you assist in the recovery of this American, you will be rewarded. And it's something that someone in evasion would carry, like a downed pilot or someone in enemy territory, to help get back to friendly territory. I went to the guy at the group headquarters who had the blood chits, and I said, hey, I need 2 blood chits. And his exact words were, hey, we've only got 500. We haven't been told who we're giving them to yet, so I can't give them to you. And I'm like, well, I'm going in tonight, so I'm pretty confident I'm one of the 500.
Yeah.
And he refused to give me blood chits without permission. And as it turns out, Tovo and I had been in Turkey 6 months previous on a different, like a planning conference kind of thing. And I went down to the local rug bazaar, and I had bought 2 fake novelty blood chits. Now, I say they're novelty blood chits, like they look exactly like real blood chits. They don't have a serial number in the corner, but they look exactly the same. So I came back and I told him, I was like, hey, I couldn't get us blood chits. They wouldn't give them to me. So I gave him one of my novelty blood chits, and I kept the other one, and that's literally what we infiltrated with.
So you got these at like a trinket store, like you'd buy your souvenirs,
like the same store you would buy a rug at outside of Incirlik Air Base, Turkey.
And they're just selling these.
I mean, this is one of the ugly stories that I don't like necessarily harping on, but I'll tell you too. Like, I'd also then asked, hey, can I get a copy of evasion maps? Traditionally, when people are, like, mostly for pilots is the more traditional experience, but for people who could be in enemy territory, you have an evasion map. The evasion map is a large-scale map of the entire territory, so you could make your way back to friendly lines. The same crew of guys that wouldn't give me the blood chits said they didn't have any evasion maps, which I was skeptical. They then said, hey, we're going to dinner. Do you want to go with us? I said, no, you guys go ahead. I got something I got to take care of. As soon as I left the office, I went through their bags and I found copies of evasion maps, because that's a real great souvenir that, you can put up on a wall and tell people you were at war. So I literally stole 2 sets of evasion maps out of their bags, and took them back and gave one to Tovo, and I took the other one. So that night we got on a C-130. We flew to Incirlik Air Base, Turkey. There's so much to this story, and I know I get into it in a little more detail, but that's really pretty comical. I don't know if you want to get too much into this, but we landed Turkey.
Yeah, I was gonna say, people like, yeah, we're going over a lot of the highlights, but and there's still lots here. People can buy the book. They got to buy the book, and they want to read the rest, right?
This is a very funny story, though. The plane lands. The 4 of us in civilian clothes get out of the plane, and the plane literally turns around and takes off. So the 4 of us are standing in the middle of a gigantic runway like 4 idiots. And here comes the little car, with the flashing light on it that you see at airports.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like an American Air Force private and like a Turkish private. And they pull up to us and they see 4 guys in civilian clothes standing on the middle of the runway. And they're like, where did you come from? And we hadn't thought this scenario out. Like, we literally stood there like idiots. We're like, So they're like, get in the car. So they bring us to the essentially the customs shack, where they're asking for our passports. They're asking who we are. And we're like, oh my God, this is all going to fall apart right now. Some guy in the crowd shouts out Tovo's name. Tovo says, hey, I recognize that guy from the CIA. And he basically pulls us out of the line. And he then whisks us away, which we explain. We're like, hey, they've got our passports. He goes back in, grabs the passports off their scanner, gives us our passports back. We leave the Turkish Air Base. We go into town. We stay in a hotel room for the night. And he explains, the next morning, we're going to put you guys in a van and we're going to drive you the 12 hours to the Turkish border, the Turkish-Iraq border. So we make the drive. We're very concerned that when we get to the border, Turkey is just going to turn us away, if not arrest us. Particularly since we disappeared off the airbase last night, and they're going to, they're the guy who had our passports is probably reporting us as fugitives now. So we get to the Turkish border, and it goes exactly as we expect. The Turkish border guards are just harassing the hell out of us, giving us a hard time. The CIA escorts we have with us were fantastic. And these guys, this is their job. Like, they know exactly what they're doing. So they're arguing with the border guards that, hey, they can't go through our bags. These are personal bags. Well, while all this is going on, and you got a picture, like, this is the Turkish-Iraq border. There's a river that separates Turkey and Iraq. There's a bridge across that river. On the bridge, I see guys from 2nd Battalion's pilot team that I know, and they're waiting for us. So I kind of wander over to them, and I'm explaining what's going on. I'm like, yeah, they're going through the bags. They're giving us a hard time. They're telling us they're not going to let us cross. So I kind of expected they were going to confiscate our equipment. So I made the decision. I'm like, if they're going to confiscate our equipment, I'm not going to let them take my pistol and my encrypted radio. So I walk over to my bags while they're still arguing, and I take out my pistol and my encrypted radio, and I put it under my shirt. Well, when I did that, my other 3 traveling companions did the same thing. So now we've all basically stolen our own equipment out of our bags. And then it dawns on us, we're like, hey, if we just put our bags in the cars with the pilot team and drove across the bridge, I don't think these Turkish guys are going to chase us. So that's what we did. We crossed the bridge, and the CIA guys did their role fantastic, because I'm sure I heard some version of the story later that the border guards then said, hey, where are those 4 other guys? To which the CIA guys said, what 4 guys? And it caused a huge stink that we slipped across the border. The Turkish government then sealed the border and said, no more crossings. No one else is crossing. So we were essentially the last element to get across the border, which was critical. I should point out, 3 weeks previous to this, we had 5 ODAs and 1 company headquarters element cross the border and link up with the pilot teams.
Okay.
So basically, where we are right now, we 10th Group have 2 pilot teams in country, one with the KDP, one with the PUK, and we have 2 ODAs and a company commander with the PUK and 3 ODAs with the KDP. That's the whole force. And now myself, the 3rd Battalion commander, and the 2nd Battalion commander and his ops officer are now crossing the border, and we're going to link up with our elements. So it comes out, it's about 45 people total, and probably a smaller number of CIA people. That's the entire contingent in northern Iraq.
Okay. Well, and one thing I was wondering too at this part, when you guys go across the border, like, how much stuff did you create for the CIA to fix? Because I imagine there's a bit of cleanup they have to do when people keep disappearing over the border and they're involved.
I don't think it was that much, because, like I said, if these guys, they know their role. Their role is to move logistics, to the border, to resupply the CIA personnel on the other side. They knew that they understood this, and they were prepared to. Getting us across was more important than some of the supplies they were trying to push.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, we did take some of their supplies with us, so they were pretty happy. Like, if they had personal bags, like, hey, get this to the other CIA guy, Tom, forward. I took that personal bag with me, so they were happy about that.
Yeah. So you cross the border. Once you're inside Iraq, you begin working with the PUK. This is where one of the main characters from their side comes in, this Jalal Talabani.
The leader, He's the leader of the PUK. So now, for anybody who's American Special Forces, this is where it starts to mirror exactly the experience we all have in training. It's almost uncanny how similar to the famed Special Forces exercises we do in our schoolhouse are to what I'm about to experience. So if you can imagine, I'm pretty tired from, we flew to Turkey. I didn't really get much of a night's sleep. We had a 12-hour drive from Incirlik Air Base to the border. I now had this whole weirdo crossing the border thing. I now get in a car with the pilot team. It's a 4-hour drive to the handoff point, which is kind of like a traditional, we almost call it like a checkpoint Charlie. It's like a coordination point between the KDP faction and the PUK faction.
Oh, okay.
So long story short, we've been traveling for like 28 hours. So we're all pretty tired.
Yeah.
When we get to the coordination point, I see the American company commander, Pat Roberson, with the Kurds, and with his guys and with some CIA folks, and they meet us. And it's really great to see him. But he gives me this look like, hey, we got to get out of here. And I'm like, why? And he's like, they don't do this that often. this is not comfortable. Meaning the two, like, because like, hey, we're in country, we did it. His perspective is, hey, we are at a coordination point where the two factions that were in a civil war for the last 4 years are both within shooting range of each other.
Yeah.
This is not a good, like, we pulled this off. Let's not make it longer than it needs to be.
Yeah.
So we get in the cars with him and we quickly depart. And now it's another 2 to 3 hour drive to the PUK headquarters. We literally get to the PUK headquarters as the sun is coming up. And rightly so, the PUK leadership are thrilled to finally have us there, and they want to have a meeting. In Special Forces lingo, we would call this the guerrilla chief meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So we go right into a meeting. We're completely exhausted, but we're going to go into a meeting, and we start with the niceties. There's some talk about the U.S. history with them, and then we get into like, so what do we think we're going to do? What do we all agree this is what we're going to do? And there's also, if for anybody who's ever done any of these kind of meetings in the Middle East, there's tea. It's all infused with tea and snacks.
Can I ask too, like when you get there, had you done any of this type of stuff before in any of your other missions?
No.
Or deployments? No.
I mean, it's a good question. As a Special Forces guy, career guy, I've done plenty of things with indigenous partners. I have a background similar to John's, in a counter-terrorist direct action oriented unit, which was fantastic. This is a little bit different, obviously, because now I'm dealing with an irregular counterpart, which an irregular counterpart is different than, say, dealing with the Turkish military.
Mm-hmm.
They have a whole different set of challenges. And we are, in at least quasi, if not enemy territory. And what I mean is the Kurds do control this territory. It's their safe haven, but make no mistake, this is Iraqi territory. And, to make that example, while we were in the meeting, one of my ODAs literally kicks the door in and is screaming, and it's great ODA, but people react differently to different things. One of the ODA members kicks in the door and screams, "We got to go right now!" And he's got body armor slung over his shoulder. He's got a weapon in his hand, and he's got like his headset sort of half on his head, and he's yelling, "We got to go! We got to go!" None of the Kurds flinched. I kind of looked at Colonel Tovo and I said, "I got this." And I stepped outside and I was like, "What's going on?" And he said, "There's an Iraqi jet circling our position," which was true. And I said, "Hey, I got it, man." And he's like, we got to evacuate right now." I'm like, "The Kurds are fine. We got to take our cue off of them."
Mm.
And the Kurds leadership, they shrug their shoulders and like, "Oh, they do that all the time." And it makes this point, like, if we had done something, I don't want to say like necessarily stupid, but like if there had been an American signature, like American Humvees outside that door, maybe they would have dropped a bomb on us. But right now, we don't. There's nothing that shows that Americans are here.
Well, I'm wondering too, what's your mindset is like? What for most people, they couldn't fathom being there, and it's like I think if I was going there, it's like, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? How's this going to go? Like, what does this all look like? I can't even believe I'm the person doing this.
Trust me, that was in the back of my mind at most moments. But you're keeping it together because we all have some experiences that have prepared us for this more than somebody who hasn't done any of this.
Okay.
So this is a unique experience, but we've done in Special Forces a lot of things that would appear odd to somebody else that a normal person would be fairly uncomfortable with. So we're able to kind of bridge that gap.
Would you say this is the start of the unconventional warfare part, like where you're trying to now get this force to start doing things for you?
Yes, but I mean, I would include the pilot team efforts also. Like once we put the pilot team on the ground, like we have actually engaged in the unconventional mission now.
And then also doing the the stuff like the language training and the the assessments and everything else. But to your question, Nathan, and Mark touched on this, is ever since Special Forces was founded in 1952, with 10th Special Forces Group being the original one, it was always for the purpose of unconventional warfare. And with all, like I said in the note that I sent you before, despite other missions being tacked on over the years, like counterinsurgency and delivering tactical nukes and kicking doors while wearing black nylon, the core training has always been about the unconventional warfare.
Okay.
And the SF qualification course has taken it's made a number of changes over the years, but one thing that's always been there is the equivalent of it. There's a final exercise called Robin Sage, where it's a very abbreviated unconventional warfare campaign where a team goes into isolation and they do a study, and it all takes place in North Carolina and in the mythical country of Pineland, which has been invaded. And there's the local residents have literally been doing this since like the 1950s, and I mean, like local families are all involved in this and everything else. And you infiltrate into this area, and you have the G chief meeting, and then especially if Mark going through as a young officer, he's like a detachment commander on this group of special forces students going through, and he has you have stuff thrown at you where it's like, okay, you're coming in, you're an American officer, you've got a certain way of doing things. And like right out of the bat, the role player that's playing the G chief is just like, I've been fighting these people for the last 20 years. What exactly are you going to do for me? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, and then there's scenarios like, hey, we just found, we just captured these guys, and we're going to walk them off into the woods and we're going to execute them. What are you going to do, young captain? And stuff like that. So there's all of these, there's all of these situations that are thrown at you as officers and NCOs for dealing with a guerrilla band that's been doing this. Because it's like, as he said before, when we're doing the what are called joint combined exercises, like 3rd Battalion, when I was there, 3rd Battalion used to train with the Italian Special Forces all the time. You're dealing with another country's military with their rank structure and everything else. Whereas you deal with a G chief, and it may be, well, he's the G chief because, his guys voted him into power, or he's the one that's killed the most bad guys, or he's the son of the last G chief. And this is and these are the things that you have to like deal with. That this is what distinguishes a special forces officer from a conventional officer like in the 1st Infantry Division.
Okay.
That's a great description, because that's what I was saying about there's different challenges within a regular partner than a Italian or Turkish or Spanish counterpart. And as John talked about, so I had not necessarily done something exactly like this, but the training surprisingly was accurate. Now, here's the one thing, John, I will say that our training was inaccurate compared to my real experience. When we trained for years, whether it's Robin Sage or something else, traditionally the guerrilla chief is problematic. He's not happy to be working with Americans. He's challenging. These guys, if you did what we did in an excess scenario, I would tell you you've made it too easy. These guys were great partners. They wanted to work with us. They were very easy to get along with. They were good fighters. There was none of the weirdness that we used to inject in training to make it harder. This was like too easy. Like these guys were great fighters.
And that's exactly the point of training. That's the goal. That's the goal of training. I mean, it's wow. Hey, this is a lot easier. This is a lot easier than Robin Sage.
The training was harder than the real experience, but it was surprising. We did have to do some negotiation and come to an agreement on things, so we were pretty well prepared for that. Two of the things that are worth noting about this too. One of the things that's really different about this entire mission, and I kind of glossed over this again, like where we are right now. Like I'm in a town or a city called Suleimania, which is in the southern portion of the PUK sector in northern Iraq. We can't get out. There's no exfiltration. Like now I say that we could try to drive back to the Turkish border, but like there's no aircraft or helicopters that can come and extract us. There's no medevac. There's no close air support. There's no chemical decontamination if we get a chemical attack. We are on our own. There's no American military base to go back to at night and go to the mess hall. So those things, you combine those together, it makes this a very different experience, which special forces are trained for. That's where the uniqueness of their training comes in. We are not functioning with well-established American lines of communication back to an American support structure. We are somewhat self-sufficient, if not at least semi-self-sufficient here with our stuff. And I will tell you, like, when you tell the guys, and this goes back to the regular guys in the ODA, hey, this is the mission, we're going in. If it goes badly, we're on our own. They all kind of just shrug their shoulders like, okay.
Yeah.
And that was really, really, it was really impressive. And it speaks to, their training, their selection, their mindset, their experience, that they were like, yeah, that's actually pretty dangerous. We're going to link up with a faction that we don't know, and if they get, hypothetically, if they get mad at us and want to just shoot us, they can do that. Now, that wouldn't be a good thing, and we don't want them to do that, obviously, but like, I don't worry about that if I'm working with the Italian Special Forces. That is clearly a reality in this scenario. If me and my counterpart get into an argument and I tell him the United States will not stand for this, and then we go on a patrol or something, it's not unfeasible that they could come back and be like, hey, the Americans were killed. It was really a shame.
Mm-hmm.
And his problem is solved. Like, that's a reality of this kind of dynamic. But so the guys were really good mentally about not letting it weigh on them of, oh my God, we're out of range of U.S. support. There's no golden hour with a medevac aircraft if we get hurt. And I say that because the combat experience of the last 20 years has had those things. Not to disparage the combat, of the last 20 years, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, but it's different. It's a very different environment. The other thing that's worth mentioning, so I talked about how, like, we're on the ground. One of the criticisms of Afghanistan in the previous year to this was the leadership at the Pentagon suddenly was getting reports that special forces teams are on horseback doing X, Y, or Z. And some of the leadership was uncomfortable when they learned, oh my God, that's a special forces team. Who's in charge of them? So there was some pressure to artificially inject, let's put higher ranking officers on the ground. That's a terrible idea. That there's no value to that. And it actually did cause some problems in Afghanistan. Togo and I were very conscious of this in planning and wanted to make sure we didn't fall into that same trap. So the role we are playing, we are not here to micromanage the ODAs. We're here as a tactical element to interface with the guerrilla leadership, meaning like the individual you talked about, Jalal Talabani. He is the leader of the entire PUK. We are here to interface with him and negotiate and coordinate and command and control. We're not here just to keep an eye on our ODAs. Like, you don't put people into harm's way, deny territory just to command and control them.
Yeah.
You would do the conventional military, you would do that, on a regular battlefield. That's not how we operate. We're comfortable with our teams being 200 miles from me, 300 miles from me. So that's a really important point, that Togo and I and our small little element planned, trained, and rehearsed back at Fort Carson to be a tactical element and not relinquish command and control.
Yeah.
So, like, what I mean is, while we're interfacing with the PUK leadership, we are still maintaining complete fidelity of what all of our 15 teams are doing. Instead of, we're not here just now we're not acting. I'm not the leader of the pilot team now.
Can you talk a little bit about Talabani, though? Like, what it was like to actually meet this guy? And because people can go look him up. He's got a Wikipedia page. Like, he's a big figure. Yeah. So what was that like?
Well, it's funny because, like I said, this was not my area of habitual knowledge. So I spent some time reading some books, in the 6 months prep up to this. I had read about him in books. I had seen dossiers on him. And now I'm in a room with him having tea, talking about things, which was really, really exciting. I liked him quite a lot, frankly. And he made no bones to talk about his early days as a guerrilla fighter in the PUK and how things have evolved and how he's very excited to be our partner now. His son, Bafel Talabani, spoke fluent English, thank God, with a British accent. And his nephew, Lahore Talabani, was also there. So these two individuals, Bafel and Lahore, incredibly instrumental at gluing all of this together. It would be a disservice to be like, oh, they were translators. They were not translators. They were guys who could translate the language, but they were key figures, team members, always at the critical point of the decisive point of whatever we were doing. And you'll see throughout the story, like when there's a gigantic attack, Baffel's at the front of it. When we're going into Kirkuk, Baffel's at the front of the column. Like, he was always there, making sure everything was going right. So that was actually really, really critical. And again, we linked up with these guys, and we weren't naive. But it was really easy.
Mm.
And then that's because the pilot team and the CIA had built a tremendous degree of rapport over the last 6 months with these guys. The pilot team had gotten into I'm not going to say a shootout, but a kinetic engagement where they acted really heroically and saved a lot of Kurdish lives. After that happened, the failed promises the U.S. government was making were not that big of a deal compared to, but you are here, my friend. This is a commitment. You've made a commitment. I trust you.
Yeah.
And so when we rolled in, it was kind of the same thing. So this meeting I'm talking about, we're exhausted. We just had this great meeting. One of my teams busted in and said, we got to evacuate because there's an Iraqi jet overhead. I stepped out and calmed it down. The other ODA walking down the hall to me, and I said, hey, did you hear about the jet? And he nodded his head. He had his body armor on under his shirt. And he said, hey, and he real quietly, and this is really interesting. He real quietly told me, hey, we've loaded the vehicles. We backed the vehicles up, that we had to bug out, but they were keeping it really calm, really low key. So the jet thing passes, comes and goes. And then the Iraqis are like, hey, do you want to go see the enemy? To which we're like, yeah, sure, why not? So they're like, hey, it's really dangerous where we're going. You really need to put on Kurdish uniforms. So they give us Kurdish attire. We get dressed up. And I should point out, I can't believe I didn't mention this up to this point. So one of the challenges we have, and this is like a conversation between me and my pilot team leader, say 6 months ago. My pilot team leader is basically reporting back to me explaining, hey, the PUK are really eager to work with us, but there's a problem. The problem is there is a Islamic extremist organization that has taken up positions in their rear area along the Iranian border.
Mm.
And as much as they would like to go fight the Iraqis and remove Saddam Hussein, this thing in their rear area border is the true threat to them. They have to contend with this first. So I talked about the PUK has 22,000 fighters available. If you could picture, I think the numbers are 4,000 of the fighters are facing the Iraqi front lines. 8,000 of the fighters are facing the KDP, with the fragile ceasefire between us and them. And the remaining 10,000 fighters are trying to contain this Islamic extremist threat on the Iranian border called Ansar al-Islam. So simply put, they're like, hey, look, we'd love to partner with you guys. We'd love to help you in your objectives, but we've got this threat to our rear area. So this gets into what I almost jokingly call like the used car negotiation, where I'm like, what's it going to take for me, to walk out of here today with an agreement? I mean, that's literally the way it went. And, they're like, man, I wish there was something we could do about this Islamic threat. And we're like, well, that's really funny you say that, because as it turns out, we're all about destroying this Islamic threat too, because they were affiliated with Al-Qaeda. So we broker, and my pilot team is like, hey, good news and bad news, or sort of bad news and worse news. He's like, the bad news is there's this Islamic threat that needs to be dealt with in the rear area. And the worst news is we've agreed that we're going to help them attack it. And if we're successful in that endeavor, they will then shift their forces to go attack the Iraqis.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the story, I think, gets really interesting, because trying to put this in context, I don't know when the invasion from the south is coming. Rightly so. That's a highly classified secret that's probably above 3-star level. I have to tie up Iraqi forces north of Baghdad in order to be successful or useful to the southern invasion. Before I can do that, I have to defeat this extremist threat in the mountainous areas. All of this needs to be synchronized in time, or it's of no value.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't want to be tied up in the mountains while they launch it from the south.
Yeah, like arguably, if we're still tied up in the mountains fighting this Islamic threat and the Americans invade from the south, I wasn't successful in my mission. There was no point to that. My mission, and this goes back to the wording, my mission is to create a northern front, a second front that will tie up Iraqi forces. And I should point out, the Iraqis have about 25 divisions at their disposal. 60% of them are north of Baghdad. 13 of them are opposing the PUK or the KDP. So that speaks to our focus is we want to keep as much of that 60% of the Iraqi military power north of Baghdad. In order to do that, though, I have to portray a viable threat. I can't portray a viable threat until I remove this threat that's keeping the Kurds oriented in a different direction, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a challenge. So now mentally, if you're thinking, like, let's pretend you got this mission, you were doing this, you're going through the normal thought process, like, okay, all right, how bad is this? Like, what are we talking about? Well, what we're talking about is roughly, let's say 500 Islamic extremist fighters held up in the 6,000 to 8,000 foot mountains along the border. And we're talking about supporting a 10,000 person Kurdish attack in daylight, uphill, in mountainous terrain. You know, pretty significant.
Yeah.
So we actually started planning that though back at Fort Carson. Like, okay, if we were going to do this, how would we do it? And this is where I said the pilot team is telling me, here's their plan for the attack. We're identifying American ODAs to link up with these Kurdish people. So like when I talked about ODAs, we're going to the JRTC to witness or observe the 82nd Airborne, 101st doing a brigade level attack. That's why that experience was so valuable, because now we are going to link up with 10,000 Kurdish fighters and be there supporting and advising elements and tying them all together. So this is the front they want to take me to and show us this. So we jump in cars, dressed in Kurdish uniforms, and it's about a 2-hour drive to the mountains that border the Iranian border. And they're incredibly beautiful. I mean, they're massive snow-covered mountains. We get there. They immediately take us into another meeting. We go into a small room. There's hundreds of Kurds all milling around the street. We have a meeting with all of the commanders that are planning this attack. And the question is coming up: when do we want to conduct this attack? When do we want to conduct this attack? The American promise was, we will get close air support. We will provide you with arms and munitions, which they are dramatically shorthanded on. And now, because Turkey has bailed out, none of that's available. So that adds to the awkwardness of this meeting of, hey, it's really great to be here. We're glad to see you guys. Where's the stuff you promised?
Yeah.
And we're not making good on any of it. But we're still working our way through the meeting. This is worth noting. I'll send you a picture of this. It's in the book. As I mentioned, this attack is taking place on the border of Iran. At the time, the United States government does not have map coverage of this part of Iran. So literally, and I've said to the people, and people have told me, oh, that's not true. I'm telling you that's true. Literally, there's a picture of Colonel Tovo with his map on the table and like 6 very prominent Kurdish commanders all leaning forward. And his map, and this is a mountainous area map where like the contour lines are as close as possible. They're ridiculous. And then the other side of the map is white blank, completely white.
Jeez.
And where we are fighting is on the border. So like and they looked at us like, why is your map blank? You're the United States. And it was almost, I don't think they believed us. More like, we don't have map coverage of that part of the world. That's just a weird oddity that people are shocked at. To make matters more complicated, if you're feeling like, well, this seems pretty simple. The issue with this thing called Ansar al-Islam, this threat, some people might remember this got some notoriety at the time during the testimony with General Colin Powell, because we believe this Al-Qaeda affiliated group has some chemical and biological weapons they've been testing. Now that's awkward because that's actually not linked to Saddam Hussein. That's a separate issue.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't want to conflate the facts like, oh, that's what we were talking about, the weapons of mass destruction. These are totally different. But in our assault of this mountainous stronghold, part of our charter is to confirm or deny the presence of biological or chemical agents by this group. So if, like I said, if this didn't seem complicated enough, just add that into it. There you go. So we have this meeting. Meeting goes fine. It's a little bit awkward. And then at this meeting, like I said, keep in mind, we've had no sleep since I left Turkey. I mean, I slept in the car, I suppose, but we've been going for like 36 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So this meeting concludes. I appreciated the tea. And they're like, hey, do you guys want to drive up and we'll show you the front lines and we'll actually point to the fighters? I'm like, sure, that sounds great. So we step out of the building, we go into the street. There's probably, 500 Kurds all milling about in the street. And this is one of those awkward trial by fire moments in any, I suppose, combat veteran's life. I hear a noise, and next thing I know, a transformer pole in the street just explodes. Like a transformer pole on a telephone pole, it just explodes. And if you've ever seen a transformer pole explode, when it explodes, it has this really weird metal twangy sound. It explodes, and all this is taking place in like 1 second. My brain just goes, that's weird. Not registering that, that's a 107 Katyusha rocket that just flew, through the air from the ridge that we can see at us.
Wow.
And as my brain is still processing, like, why'd that transformer pole explode? The second rocket hits. It literally hits the wall of the building we were just in and punched a hole through the wall right into the room we were just having the meeting, which was empty now, but devastated that room. The 500 people in the street, they all keyed in on this a little bit faster than me.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody is running in every possible direction, shouting. It's pretty chaotic. So all we knew was, hey, run for the vehicles. So we jump in the vehicles in Kurdish clothing, and I think this is accurate the way to explain this. The young Peshmerga, private that was in the vehicle was given instructions before this unanticipated rocket attack. He was told to drive this truck to the front lines. So when we jumped in and screamed go, he followed his instructions and he hit that gas pedal and we took off at top speed in this rickety pickup truck, all hanging out in the back. But he is driving toward the people that are shooting at us.
Okay, yeah, bad idea.
Yeah, and there's probably like 4 of these trucks that are all heading to the front line. And this kid, it's the same in the American military. Like, you got to be careful with your instructions because people will follow them literally. He was told drive as fast as possible, and he is driving as fast as the truck will go, which is probably like 50 to 60 miles an hour, which is not safe at all. The whole time we're driving, mortar rounds are smashing the road on the left and right of the truck, but we are continuing to go toward the enemy, which is really bizarre. I'm laying in the back of the pickup truck, getting jostled around, and I know the guy across me is an American, but he's not one of my guys. He turns out to be an Air Force special operations guy attached to the CIA. And we're both laying in the back of the truck, and real calmly, he's like, "Hey, how's it going? I'm Jack." I'm like, "I'm Mark. Good to meet you." And like, it's this bizarre, surreal meeting. So the truck stops. We're now at a piece of high ground that's overlooking the guys that were shooting at us a second ago. And we all get out like it's no big deal, like it's totally normal. And the Kurds now are like, "Okay, that is the enemy." And all I could think of was, I was like, "Yeah, no, I think I got it."
Yeah, I didn't need to see him up close.
I got it in the last 10 minutes of shooting. But it was cool because now they're actually showing us on the map. They're like, that hill is that hilltop. We did a leader's recon. We're like, okay, that was pretty significant. We get back in the cars. We go back down the hill. We're a little bit like, okay, we now have a very firsthand perspective of how serious this frontline mountainous area is and what the Ansar al-Islam elements look like. We drive back to Suleimania. I'm going to speculate we slept somewhere for a few hours, but now a different batch of PUK are like, "Hey, do you want to go see the Iraqi front lines?" We're like, "Sure, why not?" Like, this is all like in 24 hours. So again, we get into cars. We now drive an hour and a half the other way, west, till we hit what's essentially the no man's land, which is called the green zone or the green line. And this goes a little bit better. Like, we get up to a town and we're able to get out, and they're able to point to Iraqi positions on a ridgeline that are overlooking where we are. But we're dressed like Kurds, so it's not that big of a deal. Like, we don't look unusual. So that pretty much ends my first 24 hours, in Kurdish territory.
One of the things, and just how you're mentioning wearing the Kurds uniform, you mentioned this, I think it's a little bit later in the book, once you're actually talking about some of the fighting that's going on. But when you give... one of the guys was like going to switch his rifle with somebody. I think it was to do with ammunition. There was so he's going to switch his American rifle with someone who had an AK. And it's like, but if I give him this gun, he now becomes like target number 1 for all the enemy. They go, well, that must be an American. So it was just interesting, like, the things that people maybe don't think about when they go, well, why don't you just do this? Or why couldn't you just hand that off? And it's like, well, yeah, you got to realize the target you are. Yeah.
We talked about this. My preference would have been to carry an AK-47, not because I think it's a better rifle, because it blends in.
Yeah.
I don't stand out like the one odd American. And I also can interchange ammunition if I have to pick up ammunition off the ground and whatnot. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, but our M4s, those are great weapons." I'm like, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to advise. I didn't come for fighting. I came to be an advisor, and to be an advisor, I have to blend in.
Mm-hmm.
And we were getting reports at this time from Afghanistan that what I just said, they were learning that exact thing, that the Taliban was adapting and learning by the sound. An M4 makes a drastically different sound than an AK-47.
Yeah.
So in a large firefight, they would key in on the muzzle flash or the sound of the M4 as, that's the guy that deserves extra attention to kill, because that's the guy that can talk to the aircraft that dropping the bombs.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it makes you a big target.
Yeah, I would say this is old school knowledge of how to do this kind of stuff, but we've lost a lot of this because, John, 10th Special Forces Group used to maintain AK-47s for every soldier.
Yeah, back in the 80s, everybody was assigned
Yeah.
a by serial number. Everybody had had an assigned AKM from Romania to go along with their M16.
I was involved in turning those in 1986 in Stuttgart. Because the conventional wisdom at that time was we'll never use these.
Yeah.
So now here I am in 2002 saying, man, I wish I had an AK. But to your point, the guy I mentioned earlier, Jalal Talabani's son, Bafel, who I absolutely love, I said to him, hey, is there any way I could get an AK-47? And he's really funny, really sarcastic, and he's straight faced. He looked at me and goes, my government's just not comfortable giving you guys those kinds of weapons. We had a good chuckle about that, but then he's like, nah, the truth is, if I give you one, I'm literally taken out of the hands of a Peshmerga.
Yeah,
I said okay.
One thing and is worth mentioning, just because, you see a lot of the narratives in media and some of the rhetoric that's out there where people, I want to say, rag on Americans and say, you're involved in everyone else's business. But I mean, it's you guys go in and help a lot of people. You mention a part in the story where you're driving around and you kind of point to a flag on your shoulder, and it was just like from your vehicle, and you could see civilians as you're driving through, and they're just looking, and they were so excited when they see that.
One of my fondest moments. Your timing is actually perfect. So like we started to do these kinds of trips every couple of days to understand the battlefield, to understand the dynamics, to meet different commanders on the battlefield. And increasingly, like I said, most of our force is still in Romania. We have no idea how we're going to get them in here. We haven't made good on any of our promises. I have no close air support available. I'm not providing these guys ammunition or weapons. We were supposed to bring them in money, because that would also help with a variety of things. We couldn't do that. So I felt like we're letting these guys down. I literally felt really demoralized, and I struggled with, I got to do the best I can to not let this happen yet again. I can't repeat this American cycle. So one day we're driving back from Halabja, and we're in some small town, and the Kurds are driving us around like suburban. So people knew we were like VIPs, like we weren't normal Kurdish guys, even though I'm dressed like a Kurd. And we stop at like a light or a stop sign, and I looked out the window, and there's 20 Kurdish people, like family, like a guy holding his daughter. And it's just one of those things. Like it emotionally hit me. I reached into my vest, my kit, and I pulled out an American flag. And we, John, from my days in Stuttgart, when I was in C-110, we used to wear oversized American flags on our body armor that were like very similar to the flags that guys wore in World War II in Normandy. And I just pulled it out and pushed it up against the window. And as soon as I did it, the crowd erupted. I mean, lost it, cheering, screaming, because from their perspective, they're afraid. They live in constant fear, and they've heard rumors. But now they just saw a guy put an American flag up. Now, arguably, somebody would be like, well, that wasn't a good idea. That was, OPSEC-wise, that wasn't. I get it. I felt I needed to do that to offset we're failing on all of our other promises. But the one thing I'm failing on my promises, but I can show the commitment that we are physically here.
Yeah.
And I felt important about doing that. And I will say, I did that. We drove forward, we pulled away. That, it further solidified my commitment of, we have got to make this work.
I just think it was really worth mentioning. And I think it was a good part of the book because it really shows just that out there in the world, the West, Canada, US, maybe a few other places, like they are the destinations for a lot of these people. Sure, there's other people that, these extremist groups or some others that are like, no, I'm good with the way I live my life and I don't want any part of that. Fine. But there are a lot of people that do need help and look to the West for that. And just there's like always that narrative of like the Americans butting into everybody's business or they're screwing this up or that. It's like, you know what? You try fighting a war and you try saving lives on the other side of the world. Like there's nobody else really doing it. So I just thought it was a good point to bring up.
No, I think it's a great point. And I think this was one of those times in history where this is an element that needs help, and we're not avoiding it for political reasons this time. We're actually willing to risk ourselves to some degree to help these guys. Now, however we got here, it almost doesn't matter, but I'm on the ground with them, and the motto of special forces is "Della Presse Libera," which is to free the oppressed. This is a great mission, and I'm at the time in it. I'm very conscious of that we have a chance here to do something that's good.
Yeah.
On this same note, I'll tell you this other anecdote. And I think I mentioned this in the book, but it's a great story. We're all, like I said, we're kind of demoralized that we're not doing good enough. We're not doing enough, and we are struggling with how do we get the main body in? What's the plan? What's the plan? And 3 of my NCOs come up to me, and this is what I'm talking about. I know these guys. I've known these guys for years. They come up to me and they're like, "Hey, we would like to go out to the front line by Halabja, which is the Ansar al-Islam area. We just want to spend time with the Kurdish forces, the Kurdish Peshmerga. They want to show the Peshmerga, like they want the Peshmerga to meet Americans." And I totally get this. So I'm like, okay, be careful. You guys go. I'll see you tonight. So they go. And this is like classic special forces. So they come back, and as soon as they come back and see me, they got that look on their face that I've seen as a commander many a times. We're like, okay, before you say anything, let us explain. And I'm like, what happened? What'd you guys do? And and what they did was they killed a bunch of guys. Now you got to appreciate these 3 NCOs who I freaking love. One is they're coincidentally, all 3 of them are weapons guys in special forces, which we call 18 Bravos. One's a former 18 Bravo instructor, and one was a former infantryman, 11 Charlie, which is a mortarman. So they're very, very experienced. So they went out there, and part of the explanation, they wanted to go observe and assess the Kurdish capabilities. They want to see their equipment. They want to see if they're trained. So they go out there and they meet a Kurdish mortar crew that's like manning the front line against Ansar al-Islam. And they can see the enemy on the ridgeline 5-6 kilometers away. So they start talking about that, and the Kurdish guys explain they get rocketed every day from these positions.
Yeah.
So these 3 NCOs go, "Hey, would you mind if we shoot at them?" To which the Kurds look at them like, "You're out of your mind. Like they're going to shoot back, and we're going to get killed." And but I think the Kurds were like, "Hey, you know what? If you guys want to do that, we would love to watch it. We'll all be in the bunker back here. Please, by all means." And I got to imagine they were like, "Hey, check this out. Watch these 3 dumb Americans." And the guys explained to me later, this is also an example of working with irregular forces. The mortar system is a Russian-made 82 millimeter mortar. The sight that clamps onto the side of the system is an Iranian sight made for a different kind of mortar, and it's literally hose clamped onto this mortar tube.
Huh.
The ammunition is Chinese, not made for this mortar system. And if you understand how mortar rounds work, you actually push what are called cheese charges. They're like foam explosives onto the tail of it, and depending on how far you want to send it is how many charges you place on the back of it.
Okay.
All of the charges are old and rotten, so the Kurds just explained they just jam extra ones on there, so it's not exactly precise. So this is the setup that these 3 guys are dealing with, where they're like, "Hey, do you mind if we fire some rounds at those guys?" So long story short, they do fire rounds at them, and as soon as they fire a round, the enemy fires back. And if your listeners understand how mortars work, it's all about bracketing and walking your rounds onto a target, making adjustments.
Yeah.
It comes down to the skill of the crew who can do it faster. So that's literally what this turns into. It's a mortar duel between my guys and an Ansar al-Islam crew. Well, my guys won.
Yeah.
And they fired a round. The Ansar guys then fired a round. The round landed 50 meters from them. They fired a second round. Their round landed 25 meters from the Ansar guys. The Ansar guys fired a third round. It didn't adjust. This was the competition. We won. My guys destroyed that mortar crew faster than that enemy mortar crew could adjust their rounds and hit them. Mm-hmm. When they did this, and you got to imagine, like, you can physically see the enemy mortar crew blow up. Like, you can see their sandbags flying through the air and the bodies flying and whatnot. All the Kurds come out screaming and cheering, and now they're just like, "Oh my God, that was incredible!" Because for the most part, the Kurds probably just put the mortar rounds in the tube and just sort of eyeball it. Historically, where these guys are like calling out commands, they're making adjustments. Someone's watching with binoculars saying, it's 25 meters, left 25, left 50. Their credibility went through the roof. So that's why I love that story, because my 3 typical guys are like apologizing for what they did, taking their own initiative. But it's, it's good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you're building goodwill. So
No, 100%. Like we have failed in most of our promises, but the one thing we have not failed in is we have sent professionals that are committed to you guys, and you're starting to see that. So the pilot team had an engagement a few months ago where they did something similar. Now, one of my teams has demonstrated they can keep it together. They have technical skills that can make you guys better.
Yeah.
And that goes through the Kurdish ranks like wildfire. Like everyone is talking about, have you seen the Americans? They're really good under fire. And I love that story because I feel like it's very exemplary of Special Forces NCOs.
Yeah.
What they bring to something like this.
And just for time's sake, we'll probably take a break after this part, but I want to talk about, we'll push through on the ugly baby. So we'll talk about this and the infill, so bringing people in. Yeah, you want to go ahead?
So, as I said, we were really cognizant of, hey, our main body is in Romania. We are running out of time, meaning I don't know when the Americans are going to launch the invasion from the south, but it could be any day. So there's this very serious concern that if they launch the invasion and our guys are still in Romania, we're done. This mission's over. Like we will have not contributed or executed the mission we were supposed to have, creating a second front. So Colonel Cleveland gets the idea of why don't we put everybody on the 6 MC-130s they have and fly them to Jordan and then do an overland fixed wing infiltration from Jordan, and the 6 MC-130s will break into 2 groups, and 3 of them will deliver guys to my airfield, and 3 of them will deliver guys to the 2nd Battalion's airfield. Because he's concerned about this because he knows the military is going to pull those C-130s from us if we don't use them. So there's this real emphasis of we've got to do this now. So they briefed General Franks, who's the 4-star overall commander of the entire war. He says in his memoirs this was the toughest decision of the entire war for him, and I understand why. When they briefed this idea, as the story goes, somebody in the room said, "Man, that is one ugly baby," and that stuck as that's the code name for the operation. But this also speaks to what I talked about is the idea: if you're going to load 6 C-130s with Special Forces guys and ammunition, fly them low level, like if you had talked about that before 9/11, people would have told you that was insane. But we are talking about doing that now. So they load the aircraft up. As one of my former team leaders talked about, he goes, the entire center of the aircraft was just pure ammunition, rockets, explosives, ammunition. So he's like, if we got hit, you knew that was going up in a gigantic fireball. And the emphasis was, we want to put maximum guys on these aircraft because we're kind of looking at this like we get one shot at this. We get one shot to get guys in. It's more important to bring in humans than equipment. But so we found a balance where we loaded up almost all of our ODAs on our 3 aircraft, and we brought in as much as we could in terms of mortar rounds and ammunition and things of that nature. So they tried this a couple of nights in a row where they flew to they actually tried crossing the Turkish border a couple of nights, and Turkish aircraft turned them back. So that's what then pushed them to, let's go to Jordan. They went to Jordan, and the air crews, by the way, were the habitual air crews from our sister unit, the 352nd SOG, Special Operations Group in Mildenhall, England. We, as a 10th group, that's who you habitually work with from Europe.
Okay.
So, I mean, I personally knew a few of these guys at the time, and they were fantastic pilots. But so they're in Jordan for a couple of hours. They refine the plan, and they launch 6 aircraft from Jordan. I'm just going to say, I found this. I was talking to one of the air crews recently, and I was surprised to learn now that there was some criticism in the Air Force that this mission wasn't, executed well. Here's what I'd say about that: if you do something really risky and it goes badly, criticize all you want. But if you take a risk and it goes well, you took a risk and it paid off.
Yeah.
What I'm going to describe, what the air crews did was nothing short of some of the most amazing flying since World War II. It stands out as it's still the longest low-level infiltration since World War II. It's 570 miles from the Jordanian border.
It's a pretty intense read. And with the wildfires going on in California right now, this is around the time we're recording this, you see some of these giant jetliners like swooping in at hills and mountains, and you're like, you can almost reach out and touch them. Like they're doing some crazy things. So this is what it made me think of.
Some of those are C-130s. And the C-130 is a spectacular aircraft. But so they load them all up. They make a decision to cross the border, and for whatever reason, instead of crossing like abreast, they cross single file, and they stagger their times once they cross the border, like say 15 minutes apart. to minimize the signature. And the C-130, the MC-130, was built for this. It was built for the Cold War. It has all sorts of capabilities to detect enemy radar systems ahead of it and say, hey, there's an air defense gun there. There's an enemy radar there. So it will weave in and out in a specific route. But you have to picture, talking to one of the pilots years ago, his onboard computer said the lowest they went was 37 feet. I think we're still officially saying, yeah. John just made a face like, oh my God. I think we're going to say officially the lowest the aircraft went was 100 feet. I know they went lower than that. But so it's hard to imagine, if you've never seen this, an aircraft of that size going at full speed, let's just say for the sake of it, 250 miles an hour, completely blacked out. It's really weird because you can't hear it until it's on you. Mm-hmm. Like you won't hear it from the sides. You'll only hear it in the direction of flight. And I can tell you, it's pretty freaking terrifying when it surprises you, like something that big appears out of nowhere because you couldn't hear it. But so they cross the Jordanian-Iraqi border. They go tactical, as they say, where the pilots are now radio silent. They put their night vision goggles on, and the electronic warfare officer is doing their thing, calling out all sorts of detection and threats they're finding, and they're doing a great job. At about an hour and a half into the flight, they start to take fire, and they're taking pretty significant flak. And it's worth probably noting, at this time in the world, Iraq is the most sophisticated air defense space in the world because of Iraq's experience, countering American incursions for the last 10 years. So, like, you can say, well, the Iraqi military is not the best in the world. That's a true statement. The Iraqi air defenses are probably the best in the world, much like the North Vietnamese was in the 1970s.
Okay.
So the pilots start to take evasive action, and there's flak and ground fire. And like, as the pilots described, the crews described it, they could actually see guys on the ground shooting at them. So they're now struggling with, did they take it up to a couple hundred feet and risk, anti-aircraft flak shooting at them, or did they take it down as low as possible, where literally guys are shooting at them with AK-47s? And in one case, all the aircraft took fire. One of the aircraft had significant damage to the windshield from small arms fire. So this goes on. There's really about two belts of engagements where they took fire. And like one of the pilots described in his training, they trained for this kind of thing. They've never trained for it to be continuous. Very World War II-like, actually. Like, meaning, like they would do a training session where we got shot at and it would go for 5 minutes. He said they never prepared to do this for
hours,
30 minutes.
Yeah.
But they did. And the significant part, I think, to this is what those pilots did with those aircrafts was nothing short of amazing. And I mean, as a non-aviation guy, but talking to them, they pushed that aircraft to its limits in terms of, the load it could hold, how it literally how it torques when it's underweight, its extreme maneuvers. And they talked about, like, we were at one crew member's words were, we were literally afraid of a wing ripping off the plane because we knew we were bending the plane to its limits under weight and stress.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention also burning out the engines as they're taking fire. Bullets and shrapnel are hitting the wings and the fuel bladders. And I do mention in the book, it's fascinating. Like the MC-1 or all Air Force aircraft, they put chemicals in the fuel to cause them to foam up and self-seal bullet holes in the wings and whatnot. So the aircraft is doing as expected. The guys on the inside are seeing the bullets come through the aircraft and rip through insulating material. Like one of my team leaders talked about just watching insulating material on the roof of the aircraft just start to shred.
Jeez.
He knows that's flak through the walls.
There was one guy who wasn't strapped in properly, and as it's banking from side to side, he's flying back and forth on this tether.
I got no problem. Absolutely,
yeah.
I got no problem identifying him. That's Joe Locke, one of my best team leaders, utterly fantastic team leader. He is now currently the deputy commander for Special Operations Command Europe. He's actually, I think, he's the only guy still on active duty. God bless him. But like when I was his instructor in the Q course. He was a great team leader. His team sergeant was a longtime friend of mine. And when they were getting on the aircraft, that was the big joke, that they were like, hey, here's a piece of nylon, tie this to your waist and snap link it into the floorboard. And he talks about his mindset was, hey, I'm not going to make this real tight. I want to be comfortable. I want to be able to get up and move around and lay. And he said, you realize the first time the plane did an evasive maneuver and everybody found themselves weightless, he found himself 2 feet higher than everybody else in the back of the plane. And like my experience watching the transformer pole blow up, his experience, he said, he goes, I was 2 feet above everybody else, and I realized this seems to be a bad thing. And as he's thinking it, makes an alternative, and everybody slams onto the deck. And he said, he was hurt pretty bad actually, but he quickly realized, like, I've got to take, some slack out of this nylon. And his team sergeant, who's like the funniest guy in the world, just made some comment like cherry mistake, rookie mistake.
Yeah, he's an advocate for wearing a seatbelt in a vehicle now.
This is the crazy thing. Like, and he talked about how the aircraft is literally filled with some guys are quietly praying, some guys are throwing up, and other guys are literally snoring and falling asleep. And his team sergeant, who worked with me in C-110 again, his attitude was, hey, when it's your time, it's your time. There's nothing you can do about it. Might as well just go to sleep. And there were other team leaders that had the headset on listening to the air crews, and someone said, hey, what are you hearing? What are you hearing? And he just took the headset and goes, you don't want to know. You don't want to hear it. Because it was constant, the crews shouting, take it up, take it up. No, take it down, take it down. And they're just going up and down, trying to find a space where they're not getting shot at. So of the 6 aircraft, I can't remember now off the top of my head which one in the stack, but one of the aircraft took so much damage, it wasn't going to make it to the airfield. And it might have made it, but they made a decision of, if it lands at the Kurdish airfield, it's never leaving. And that would have shut that airfield down. So they made a decision to do an emergency abort and head to Turkey. And that's actually pretty fascinating, because keeping in mind, Turkey said, hey, they're out. They're not going to let us use their airspace. As that aircraft's coming into Turkey, Turkish air control is telling them they're denied. To which the air crew's like, we're not asking. We're telling you we're coming in. We're either landing or we're crashing, but we're coming in one way or the other. So they land in Turkey, and when they landed, that chemical I talked about in the fuel cells now turns everything that was foam that was blocking things. It reduces it because of the air pressure difference, and now fuel is pouring out of holes in the aircraft. And they hit the alarm. They do an emergency offload of the aircraft, and the Turks see all of this, and they realize, oh my God, we've miscalculated this. We've messed up. And quickly they reverse their position of, my friend, why are you not using our airfields? Why would you do that? We're your ally. And I mean, I said that because I think they tried to make a call of what was in their political interest. And now they're realizing the Americans are risking aircrafts flying across Iraqi airspace because their ally, denied them the use of airspace. Yeah. So they opened up space after that event. The other 5 aircraft, 2 land in the KDP sector, 3 landed at my sector. I'm on the airfield receiving them with the Kurds. And that's where I said, I can tell you, a full-size C-130 landing in the dark, blacked out, is a significant emotional event. It's shocking. Like, it just appears out of nowhere. And it's loud, and it's something. And so the aircraft lands, quickly turns around, the ramp comes down. And this is kind of funny, because the ODAs they told me this a few years ago. They had rehearsed offloading, 50 times, where they could rip all their equipment out and take it off real quickly. Well, we did not anticipate that. And the Kurdish elements I was with gave their Kurdish soldiers instructions to get on that aircraft and rip all the equipment out and offload it as quickly as possible. So you got these ODA guys who just had a hell of a 2-hour ride, and they're kind of all jostled around and messed up. And now these Kurdish guys pour onto the aircraft. And the Kurds are good at this. Like, they follow instructions. They did not dilly-dally. Like, they ripped everything out of the back of that aircraft, to include things like fire extinguishers, first aid kits, that belong to the aircraft. So, and the ODAs all joked that, and when they did it, they just dumped it all in a pile off to the side. So, like, nobody knows what equipment is ours. Oh, okay. It's just a gigantic pile of American equipment. But Joe Locke, the guy I was talking about, my former team leader, he talked about it. He goes, the aircraft is turning now to get off this airfield, because I should point out, this airfield is at the maximum edge of the range of Iraqi artillery. Like, the Iraqi front lines are about 35 kilometers away. So, like, if the Iraqis made a small push, they can actually maneuver artillery or rockets to hit this airfield. So that was my biggest fear. So that's what we want to get. We want to get the aircraft off this airfield as fast as possible. Joe Locke talks about jumping back on there at the last minute just to double check if anybody lost a pistol or a radio or whatnot. He says it was just, you saw, like, bottles filled with urine, vomit bags, a couple of grenades rolling around. And he just looked at the air crews and was like, okay, we're good. And then got off because we didn't lose any equipment. the teams then got shuttled to me where, and I was actually surprised to see ODAs like not know where I had been for the last few weeks. And again, it's that personal, like, these are friends of mine, like we know each other. And then like, I suspect we hugged, when we saw each other, like, oh my God, sir, I haven't seen you in so long. I'm like, man, it's, everything's good. And I can remember telling a couple of guys, I'm like, okay, look, we don't have a lot of time. Here's what I need you to do. Keeping in mind, we don't have cars. All of our vehicles that were purchased for us, that were Land Rovers, are in Turkey. So I have now coordinated with the pilot team over the last couple of days to get family vehicles. So like, as an example, an ODA gets their equipment 5 minutes off after getting off the plane. They come to the side to me. I get them into a building. I give them a quick intel brief of here's what's going on. Here's the deal. I've acquired 3 cars for you. One's a small truck, one's a small bus, and one is the car of a guy's wife. And I give him the keys. I'm like, this guy is your guide. He's going to take you to your Peshmerga commander. It's about a 2-hour drive from here. He doesn't speak English. But I talked to him this morning with Boffel, and we made sure he understood the instructions. He knows where to take you. And the teams are just like, okay. And I'm like, here's a piece of paper with my satellite phone number on it. Call me when you can. Do you understand? And they were like, got it. I'm like, I need you to get off this airfield as fast as possible. And I say this because, like, this would freak some people out how loose this command and control was. Like, I didn't say, you will check in with me by 8 o'clock. I'm like, call me when you can. And the teams are now about to embark on their own experience, just like mine, where they're going to meet their guerrilla chief, and they're going to be awake for the next, 24 hours. And they did. And they all moved out. We pushed, I think, 14 ODAs out that night, or maybe 13, to link up to get out to their positions.
I was going to say, and that's the part about delegation. I mean, you've got a lot of other things you're worried about in this this moment. Well, so yeah, you can't just sit on this one thing and be like, I'm waiting for them to do these things, and I got to micromanage. So
this is very much like releasing a virus, into a computer system. Like, no, I'm serious. Like, okay, I got to explain it this way. Like, I studied this problem for so long, I felt like I started to understand Saddam's strategy and thinking, to where I could see, I literally felt like I could see things differently. And there's a little part of me, it's like, my plan worked. You failed to counter me. I've gotten my ODAs in and I've dispersed them. And it's like putting a virus in a computer, like, good luck stopping it now. There's not much you can do. And to use military terms, we actually identified this and briefed it as the decisive point. Mm-hmm. And I say that because this doesn't achieve my mission, but it definitely puts me on a road to achieving my mission. And it makes it, after this event, when I disperse my teams, Saddam's ability to stop me is now greatly reduced. Meaning, if Saddam that morning fires rockets and kills me on the airfield, while it's too bad for me, my ODAs are all dispersed. You can't stop them. They can still do the mission. So this is a hugely significant event for us to get the team to pull this off, to get the teams in country after that crazy flight, and now get them dispersed this way. And again, imagine, like I said, the hodgepodge of, this is a guy's wife's car, this is a pickup truck, this is a school bus, this is a dump truck, and the teams are just like, got it. They grab their rucksacks, get in their weird cars with their guide who has been briefed on where to take them, and they go link up with their guys, and they call me when they can.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I think that's a good place to wrap this up. We will do a part 2, because from the decisive point and then forward, this is it just continues the craziness. So we'll wrap it there for now. We will come back with a part 2.
Yeah. Okay.
So everyone, be sure to tune in next week for part 2, the conclusion to this story from the 10th Special Forces Group with Mark Grdovic.